I'm about to enter into chapter 7 of this growing book I'm writing. Uh, I do so after a great struggle. This has been the hardest of any of my presentations put together. I'm going to spend a lot of time on matters that are not directly related to the contents of the chapter because I need to place the contents of the chapter in a historical context. Now, I'm putting it here because it occurred to me as I was putting this chapter together that there are many things about the history of marriage and the history of relationships between two people trying to create a partnership in life that have played out across eons of human history. And maybe that should be material that's at the beginning of the book. I don't know. But I have the material now, so I'm going to plop it into the beginning of this chapter because it's particularly relevant to this chapter. And maybe when I have a draft of all the blathering I've been doing, I'll choose to reorganize it in some way because the material is both important and yet doesn't bear very directly on what I'm going to be talking about. So here are some of those general considerations. We're all prisoners of culture. Our work to create a marriage is vastly influenced by our having been taught at home, through teachings at school, through the media, through watching others we meet along the journey of life, about what are the essences of maleness and femaleness, and what is the desired relationship between partners in a marriage. Who has the power over what and under what circumstances? Who should have power over what and under what circumstances? What life tasks are essentially male and which are essentially female? So let me go back to the beginning of time and make a running journey up until the present. I'm going to be leaning on coursework I've taken over the years in both physical and cultural anthropology, some work in sociology, and certainly some comments by some well-known psychoanalysts. I also am remembering a Cosmos episode I saw back in probably 1915, no, 2015. What am I saying? Back in 2015, when Cosmos was revisited, now with Neil deGrasse Tyson as the presenter, rather than the first set that was really wonderful. During one of Tyson's presentations, he mentioned the history of human life on Earth. And he asked the viewers to consider the following. Suppose the history of the whole universe could be translated into a calendar of 1 year, with the Big Bang starting on January 1st and where we are presently on January 31st at the end of the year. He said we should understand that the emergence of human beings and human consciousness have taken place at the last second on the night of January 31st, the last second before midnight. We are very new in the universe and even new on our own planet. And our whole history is just but a blink of an eyelash. That's really a very powerful image. I also did some research to get ready for this, looking about what we know about when Homo sapiens emerged as a separate species on the planet. What is that in real time, not in metaphorical time on a holiday calendar for a year? It turns out that the oldest fossil identifiable by DNA and by carbon dating that is likely to be a Homo sapiens skull was buried in the earth about 300,000 years ago. I thought it was a much shorter time. I was shocked to read that. People like us emerged and start to live 300,000 years ago on this planet. Of course, in our time frame, that's a very long time. Well, how did we start? It seems likely that the nature of the existence of Homo sapiens was as pack animals who were hunters and gatherers, just like any pack of animals tends to be. Uh, there were very few roles, separate roles for anybody. Most people were busy scurrying, looking for food, rejoining the pack. There was a differentiation between males and females because it was women who gave birth to children and had to suckle them if we were to survive, and men didn't have to do that. And maybe because men had slightly stronger muscle strength, they could go after the bigger animals we were attempting to kill and turn into food for us better than women could. I don't know. That's speculation. There weren't a lot of roles, and there wasn't a lot of differentiation between the two genders. We went from that state, being hunters and gatherers, to a variety of transformations. And what is both thrilling and sickening is these are very important transformations about how Homo sapiens organizes itself. The profound transformations are coming at an increasingly rapid rate. More of them come on us sooner, and before we even get a chance sometimes to adapt to the previous set of transformations. The first important transformation was the invention of agriculture. That happened about 200, the year 200,000. Somehow human beings were intelligent enough and creative enough to figure out they didn't have to keep going across the landscape in a nomadic fashion, gathering and hunting for what was needed to survive. They could take something called seeds and they could put that in the ground and stay where they were and kind of watch over the seeds, made sure that they were irrigated and got enough sunlight. And crops that were possible to eat would grow, and so people could start staying in one location. Uh, the invention of agriculture and the diminution of nomadic life was the first important transformation in what life was like for us after we emerged from the sea as Homo sapiens. I've heard debates. There are many people who know a lot about nutrition who say that when we invented agriculture, life expectancy shortened significantly because we were actually getting a better diet and a richer, more variegated diet when we were hunting and gathering than we were when we were raising one or two crops in the same place and simply confining our eating to what we could grow ourselves. We probably had more malnutrition, more fragility. I won't go into that topic. It's not relevant. But like everything else, if you get something, you pay for it some way. What was the nature of human collectives? Were there human partnerships back then? Were there things akin to marriage when people settled down and took place in one and took up one place? Bruno Bettelheim, the psychoanalyst, took a look at the anthropological literature about this period of human existence up until the period between about the year 200,000 BC and the year 10,000 BC. Life remained relatively structured in that fashion all over the world. Agriculture was being invented and taking hold. And there were fewer and fewer places that were totally nomadic. And yes, people were starting to couple with each other. They were starting to have partners for varying periods of time. It was particularly useful as a survival device because a woman was in no capable place to take care of, go through the later stages of pregnancy, take care of an infant and carry on as a participating member in the agricultural activities that were necessary to raise the crop. So it was nice for her to have a partner who would be going to work and taking care of bringing home food supplies for her and for the infant. uh, Bettelheim had interesting things to say about this period of time, though. According to his research and his own analytic thinking, that period from the year 3000 AD to 10,000, 3000 BC to 10,000 BC was characterized by female power in many ways. Most of the clans that existed on the agricultural lands were matriarchies. There was a woman leader. There we had grown a belief in various kinds of deities depending on where we were. Agricultural collectives had deities who were the god of the rain, the god of the crop, the garden, the god of the land. Things related to the agricultural output was tied to gods who were responsible for seeing to it that if human beings behaved properly, the gods would make sure that the crops would come to fruition. So the holy people in those collectives tended to be women too. And the tribal elders who had wisdom were women. How did that come to be? Bettelheim speculates that men probably always have carried some primordial fears and awe of women's capabilities. There were two things that women were able to do that men were privy to knowing that seemed absolutely incomprehensible unless women were partly of the other world, the spirit world, as well as this world. The two things were life grew in women's loins. How the hell could that happen? The dominant theory back in those times was that this was some kind of immaculate conception. Some god figure, some deity had chosen a woman that is beyond a certain age to somehow cause her to become pregnant, and that the child was partly a child of one of the gods as well as the child of the woman. So women had a much closer and holy relationship with the spirit world, one that men could never attain or come to. The second thing that was just striking for men about women was every period of time, women would have a period. They would start bleeding profusely. They seemed to be badly ill or injured in some way with copious blood coming out of them, and yet it seemed to heal spontaneously. More than that, 2 plus 2 was put together and came up to 5. Depending on what the location was, somehow the cycles of the bleeding seem to be correspond to this about the same period as the moon going through some kind of phases together, or of the oceans moving the high tide and low tide periods. And that made no sense to anybody except for the fact that there were spirit forces involved in women's bleeding and then not bleeding anymore that were tied to supernatural events. And so men were partly frightened of women and allowed them to take charge and to lead. They didn't want to do anything to get the women unhappy or troubled with them because they were afraid of what the consequences would be. In those cultures and in those villages and alongside the fields where the goods were being raised, uh, there were strange practices. Uh, According to the anthropological literature that was available and translated for us about the turn of the 20th century, going back into these periods so long ago, males had a puberty ritual. The puberty ritual was celebrated somewhere around age 13 or 14. It represented a transition. The young male was to become a grown male after that. And he was taken out of the village and tutored by the older men. He was given training in what men should do and how men should behave and what should be the harmonious relationship between men and women and how the crops were to be tended and what his responsibility as a member of the agricultural team would become. And then, when all was said and done, he was brought back in the village after the training, and a strange procedure was inflicted on him. With whatever sharp implements they had back then, his penis was cut open from the base to the tip. It bled profusely. It was folded back, and it became like a labia. It was bound up with the leaves so it wouldn't heal back together. It healed open after many weeks. And from now on, he could not direct his stream of urine because it dribbled out of the base of his urine where the urinary tract had been severed by the surgery. And he had to squat to urinate after that. So in that, he was urinating like women were now. Uh, Many of the parts of this culture also celebrated childbirth in a strange way. The pregnant woman was taken out of the village by midwives close to the time it was expected she would give birth to the child. And her husband, or at least the man who inseminated her as best as or had sex with her, coupled with her, was charged with caretaking her, came back to where they lived. He took up a place in whatever were the bedding arrangements. His belly was plumped up under covers with pillows, so he would look like he were pregnant. And for some hours, he would writhe and scream as if he were in pain. And eventually the baby would be brought, after the baby had been born by the mother, would be brought to him, and he would rock the baby and hold it in bed proudly as if he had given birth to the baby. Bettelheim believes that there was great envy of being able to be pregnant and giving birth to children on the part of men. But in contemporary world, men denigrate women, put them down, and try and keep them in a one down position. And that's happened for generations now. And I'll get to the next transformation when that started to happen. The second transformation took place 10,000 years ago. Some bright person or persons began to understand that sexuality between man and women was not just a gift given by the gods, so we could have delightful pleasures and erotic transport by playing with other people's bodies. It wasn't just a gift from a god. The semen that came out of a man's penis had something to do with babies coming. And for the first time, it became clear that both men and women had to participate in the making of babies. And the babies were not gifts from deities, but it was an act that followed an act that was undertaken by a man and a woman in partnership. Oh, did the world change after that consciousness began to set in? We now had the Greek, the Roman, and the Egyptian period. Now suddenly we don't have only female deities and female priests or priestesses. We have male deities and female deities, and they're often full of petty jealousies and hatreds and trying to destroy each other and outdo each other. And this is probably very much mimicked on Earth and what became a battle of the sexes, fighting about it and trying to reorganize what the various roles and positions were that men should occupy and women should occupy. And because men are capable of making stronger, short bursts of muscle movement, men can overturn a woman's muscles and he can pound her into submission if he chooses to do that. There are very few women who can prevent that from happening. And slowly by stages, men subjugated women. They overcame their fear of them, subjugated them, and relegated them to second-class citizenry. And the female gods started to disappear with evolving cultures, and we arrived at monotheism with what has always been a male god. So starting 10,000 years ago, men have been in the ascendancy, have demoted women, have taken privileges away from them, have made them subservient to men, and have treated them as if they were less than, they were not as intelligent as, they were not as capable as, they were not as worthy as, They were second-class human beings that could serve men in various ways, but if you got right down to it, were fairly useless creatures. That was the second transformation. The third transformation took place in the 1800s, long after the start of the second in the year 10,000 AD, or around that. By the 1800s, the Industrial Revolution was in full swing. The invention of agriculture had very profoundly transformed human life. The invention of technology and the manufacture of various instruments that were useful in technology started to create the factory and started to create other workplaces than the farm. Currency arose, barter arose, and people were able to earn livings now doing nothing that had to do with raising crops. Fewer people were raising crops. People were moving into cities where the manufacturing processes were located. And for the first time, it was possible that women could work at something other than agriculture. They too could have some roles in manufacture, or some support positions in those structures where manufacture was going on. So the beginnings of women who were single being able to support themselves started, and the trip away from the farm and the transfer of most of the population increasing into cities started in the late 1800s and has been running ever since. The population along the coastlines and in the cities of this country continues to increase, and the populations in the towns and villages of the West and the Midwest are diminishing decade by decade by decade, and we're getting more and more congested in the areas that are already congested. So at least there were the beginning of some roles for women that could make their way independently. They ran sewing machines in sweatshops, for instance. Oh, let me back up. Up until the Industrial Revolution, there seemed to be only 4 occupations that women could fulfill without being thought odd. Teaching was one of them. Women were allowed to become teachers because children went to school during the days when men were working. So it was useful to have women as teachers. So they were able to get the training they needed to become teachers, and it was not considered odd for a woman to remain a spinster and a teacher over the years of her lives. Many of them were exempted from pressure to get married, as a matter of fact. Librarians, for some reason. I guess that's kind of an extension of teaching, worrying about books and getting people to read books. So librarians were typically female too. Then nurses, after the Civil War, nurses became popular in helping doctors. Doctors needed some assistance when they were doing some kinds of doctoring. And the assistants didn't need to know everything about medicine. It was useful to have not quite as well trained assistants. So the profession of nursing started to flourish, and it was primarily a female profession. And then there was the oldest profession of all. Women could be prostitutes and support themselves. They could service men's sexual desires and get paid for it and be economically independent if they did that. Aside from those 4 things, there were very few pathways to women becoming economically independent. But the Industrial Revolution started a trend finding things for women to do in the manufacture of goods that women could do. And so with each passing decade, there were a few more roles in the places that businesses were producing goods of one sort or another. The fourth transformation took place in the 1920s. They're coming faster and faster now. It's no longer the late 1800s, but now we're in the 1920s. Women began to press for political equality. They no longer didn't want the right to vote in those places where voting was an instrument of picking government. They didn't want to be second-class citizens anymore. They didn't want men to be the deciders of all things in a marital relationship if it was a heterosexual marriage. They wanted power and greater power and authority over their own life. And they started taking to the streets and marching for this. And it took a while before men were willing to grant some increasing power privileges to women. But the march forward continued during that period of time and has not abated since then. The fifth transformation happened in World War II. 20% of the nation's adult male population went off into war service and even left the shores of the United States, leaving a terrific gap. How we were the arsenal of democracy. How are we going to keep all the blast furnaces and the manufacturing facilities optimally engaged in the war effort, and the movement to have Rosie the Riveter came. Even jobs in factories that were traditionally male jobs started to be filled by women. Women became test pilots. Women delivered aircraft across the pond. Women were riveting airport plane fuselages. Women flooded into the workforce in huge numbers to replace the missing men. And we had to invent childcare centers of one sort or another to take care of the very small children who were not able to attend school many hours a day yet. That transformation has never altered either. At the present time, modal families are two worker families. Unless one is very affluent, usually there are two people working and expected to work, because the only way to climb up the socioeconomic ladder in this country, and in many other of the countries of the world, since capitalism is the driving economic force, is to have enough money is generated by two people to get some of the benefits of what's possible. One person cannot do that alone. Most one worker families are living near the poverty level in this country. Now we're in the middle of the sixth transformation. We are undergoing the digital revolution. It started in the 1970s as cell phones began to be organized. It didn't require a connection to a landline. As the phones got smarter, as computers came into general use, as social media started to flourish, the world has changed markedly again. One of the byproducts of all of this is a loosening of a belief in the rigid binary definition of human sexuality. It turns out that we have had closeted among us a large number, somewhere between 10 or 20% of the population, whose sexual proclivities, sexual behavior, sexual imagery, and sexual desire does not conform to the binary standard that men are men and women are women, and they should, the destination of life should be that they should form a partnership and they should go forth, be fruitful, and multiply. That one is absolutely on its butt right now. That is waning as a culturally esteemed and culturally demanded generation for the people who grow up in the culture. The culture itself is becoming very, very fluid. The census statistics bear this out. There are fewer and fewer marriages made every year in the United States. The divorce rates are remaining steady at about 53%. So marriages, certainly in the majority, are not unions that last a lifetime. We have permitted now people with alternative forms of sexuality to marry. We don't dictate that marriage is limited to a heterosexual couple consisting of one man and one woman. The institution of marriage itself is changing, and related to all of this, the birth rates in our country are going down. Fewer and fewer persons in the so-called advanced nations are having children. And maybe that's one of the things that will give some small help to the climate problem, because we are turning out fewer and fewer human beings. We're going to pollute the atmosphere slightly less, probably not at a fast enough rate to make a significant difference before there's real trouble. But that dynamic goes on. All of these things now really interfere with the work that I'm going to talk about in this chapter. We are confused. What is a man? What is a man supposed to be? How is a man supposed to act? What's he supposed to believe? What are male things that he's supposed to do? Are there any? Are there any things that are male? My favorite example is the best Sherpas and the ones most valued are women now. Why is that? Because males are really good at lifting heavier weights. They can carry a heavier load than women can. But one of the real biological differences between men and women seems to be that women have more stamina and endurance over a long pull than men do. Men will come to, if they're asked to work hour after hour in that rarefied atmosphere, they may have a heavier pack, but they can't keep doing it. If you give both a man and a woman the same pack to carry, the man will get burned out and have to stop before the woman will. And there's empirical research on this topic. So that has had survival value of some kind for women to have greater stamina. Yes, she has less muscle strength in short bursts, but she has better strength of a kind that involves stamina than men do. Women seem to be better at understanding and living with spatial relations. If you give standardized tests to women, they consistently score better at that. So maybe they might make better architects. I don't know. There are things that might be more useful to trust with a woman. But I think it's overwhelmingly my sense that to say there are things that women should do and things that men should do that are really the lingering stigma of having been taught something by the culture and are not based in any reality. So, where are we? Where are my notes? I have to turn a page. Please forgive me for being clumsy. The pages are sticking together. Okay. Where is the where is the digital revolution going? I am frightened. I am frightened that Aldous Huxley, bizarre and austere prediction that he made in Brave New World will come true. He predicted for the future that we're going to move our cities underground in order to save energy. It's a constant 68 degrees, 28 feet down into the soil. So if we build our cities underground, it would take less energy to air condition and heat them. And human beings, or by that time, will not be marrying at all anymore in his Brave New World. Everybody will be single, and they will have a cubicle of some sort, comfortable enough to live in. And there will be technology that brings in news, entertainment, and the screens will also allow them to make connections with other human beings. And most social relationships will be digital. They won't be in real time with real presence of another human life. Uh, the bearing of babies will be done in the laboratory. There will be artificial insemination of semen and harvested eggs. And people will occasionally have orgasms by masturbating or once in a while getting together with somebody to have sex, but there will have been a separation between sexuality and insemination. Every day at noon, Huxley said, the government, there'll be a world government then, and only one culture. The government news will come on at precisely noon with good wishes from whoever is the president or leader, or whatever title that person carries. The news of the world will be given, and then at the end of the hour of the march of news, the set will revert. You can get any kind of entertainment, travel logs, teachings that you want, of topics you want to study, visiting with friends, anything you can do except for that hour. But the end of the hour will have always the same sign off. Now remember, take your soma now. The government will have invented a psychoactive medication that's dispensed to everybody, and people are required to take at 1 o'clock promptly. And it is a feel-good substance. It allows people to feel at peace with their lives, feel that life is good, the world is a wonderful place, and all is well with everything. The soma keeps them in that state. So I find that novel frightening and depressing because I see us having moved significantly in those directions, and I don't see anything that's going to get us to stop moving in those directions. Well, we're not there yet. I don't know how long that journey is going to take, or I won't be here, so I won't know for sure. But that is the backdrop I wanted to portray. Long periods of consolidation with certain textures to it, and culture defining in some ways what men were doing, what women were to do. And finally, getting to this last transformation where it's become totally unclear what men are supposed to do or women are supposed to do. And what are the limitations of what men can do and women can do? Oh my goodness, we have women astronauts now. I forgot about that one too. Maybe it'll be women who do better at exploring new worlds. Who knows? So a couple comes together, and I'm going to save talking about couples that contain alternative sexualities. That's about 20% of the population. I'm talking about the mainstream. People who are heterosexual and still in the greatest number at this point, and are trying or are making the attempt to enter into what's becoming a dying thing, enter into the sacrament of marriage and attempt to build a life partnership with a partner of the opposite sex. That's the biggest chunk of the population. That's what my book is about. So I'll limit myself to that. I'll also, for now at least, give up the temptation to talk about the separate problems of creating step families, because many people get married and there are already children that exist from previous marriages. And somehow the fact that the children exist and what to do with and about the children has to get incorporated in all the work the couple has to do to build the understanding of what the nature of their unique marriage is going to be. So let me just talk about people who are gotten married and have no children. They may never have children. They may decide to have children later. But at the present time, when they have to build the structure of their partnership, there are no children whose needs need to be taken into consideration. These are people who agree to enter into the institution of marriage, pledging to be faithful and not undertake the exploration of possibilities for full or partial intimacy with any other, and promise to keep this commitment going for the rest of their lives. In order to carry out the task of building the agreed upon marriage, though, the couple has an enormous amount of work to do. In earlier presentations, I began to visit some of the challenges in the earlier chapters of this book. In this presentation, I will review a myriad of tasks that have to be undertaken to weave together the shared life of the couple. It is the making of commitments to each other about how these tasks are to be apportioned between them, which ones will be done separately with both members of the couple addressing some designated portion of the task, him or herself, which ones will be shared and done together, which ones may be contracted out to some third party outside the marriage for execution. Most couples have difficulty creating and working their way through this complex structure. Their desires to embrace some task or to want to partner to or to want the partner to take up an item is vastly influenced by culture and by a sense of what men should do or what women should do. And of course, the opposite, what they never should be asked to do. So let me foreshadow something. In making commitments to be responsible for some task, to monitor the need, and to implement action at required times should not be based on the gender of the assigned person. Culturally esteemed recommendations about how these arrangements should be made must be ignored. Instead, three principles should be followed in building the structure. One, neither party should come away from working through, neither party should come away from working through these challenges feeling that he or she is being asked to do too great a share and therefore experiences a state of exploitation by the partner. Two, it is best if the person on duty for a particular task is the one who likes the task the best, or at least the person on duty for a particular task is one who does not hate doing it the most strongly. Three, the one doing the task should be the pair who has the best skill set for doing it. Four, some tasks can be split with each doing that task for the self as it involves just him or her. In no particular order, let me just rattle off a variety of tasks that have to be undertaken to support our complex lives in this, the first quarter of the 21st century. Some of these involve taking over something outside the home that the couple needs to put effort into. Others are tasks needed to maintain life in the residence. I am sure my list is quite incomplete, but here goes. If one of the couple is handy and has the necessary tools, doing minor repairs of possessions, furnishings, plumbing, electronics, or other aggravating disruptions that take place in all their lives should be embraced by one of them. Two, contacting a landlord or securing and supervising the needed technicians to come from the outside world to do more serious repairs in order to make the residence habitable again needs to be done. Three, hiring and supervising an accountant as needed. Four, preparing for tax filing. Five, securing postage, wrapping packages, and or taking mail to the mailbox or post office. Six, planning recreation for the couple. Seven, deciding what to do about rituals of attendance each brings to the union from their past, honoring birthdays, annual holidays, regular holidays, weekly dinners, or deciding it is time to start cutting back and creating the partner's own rituals. Agreeing about what to do with old loves, affair partners from the past. Sharpening knives. Primary care of pets, including bathing, securing and feeding, exercising, and vet visits. Making appointments for medical dental appointments. Cooking specified meals, setting the table and clearing it, and doing kitchen cleanup and restoration afterwards. Loading and unloading the dishwasher. Cleaning the residence, including vacuuming, scrubbing toilets and bathtubs, mopping floors, cleaning windows, dusting. Cleaning furniture periodically and replacing once in a while as needed. Changing bedding. Taking out recycling and trash. Taking barrels to the curb. irrigating any plants in the home, irrigating the grounds, cleaning out the refrigerator, monitoring the accumulation of stuff, and making decisions about what to trash, what to donate, and perhaps what to try to sell. Arranging for and supervising a maid or house cleaning crew. Evaluating and securing needed insurance, including auto, life, residence, disability, and long-term care. Going to the grocery store for needed food and home supplies. Going to the hardware store for other kinds of needed supplies. Picking, securing, and wrapping gifts for agreed upon others as needed. Planning and arranging vacations. Taking leadership for proposing a budget and managing finances. The physical paying of bills by check and or online, and monitoring whether or not the personal check register is accurate. Suggesting and arranging recreational experiences. Suggesting and arranging entertainment. Suggesting and inviting friends with whom to socialize and where to do so. Deciding on and making political and or charitable contributions. Doing laundry and putting it away. Going to the cleaners. Shopping for clothing. Supervising and carrying out maintenance and repair of any automobiles. Checking tires and fluid levels. Periodically arranging auto leases or purchases and carrying out the negotiations. Going to the car wash. Going to secure fuel. It takes 2 years, as I've listened to couples, to work through the entire range of challenges. And I'm sure there are others that may be more idiosyncratic or others that just slipped my mind while I was putting together my list. I will stop at this point. Good, I'm within my allotted time. I could have been making, but I'm not going to do it in this chapter. I don't even know if I'm going to include it in this book. Comments about what happens to this entire structure and about how to deal with that on becoming parents, on making the decision to have a child and the first child arrives, and about working through the array while creating a step family if one has to do that. So including children by either fashion makes it much more hard to do the things I mentioned, to arrive at understandings about how these things will go forward. And if a good structure has already been put in place, once the later stages of the wife's pregnancy and the arrival of the child comes, everything in that array that's been negotiated and worked out gets bankrupted and has to be revisited and reworked, because it just can't be done in the same way by the same people any longer. And on that futile note, I will rest for today. What an array of nonsense I visited today. It was all stirred in me by having to write this chapter.
I'm exhausted from the history of the world already.
Yeah.
I was just impressed with the all the work. Now, wait a minute. So there's basically two options. There's all these systems we need to work on, but there's also this option where I get to watch TV all day and take a happy drug.
Yeah.
maybe I'm in on that one. That one sounds pretty good.
Oh, I forgot. Yes, meals are delivered. Meals are delivered to the
yeah.
cubicles.
Look at that. Yeah, I can see this starts to become appealing.
All right, with the couple that choose not to have children, Arthur,
Yes.
are you also differentiating out the reasons why they're not having children? What about the couple who adamantly do not want children or to bring children into the world versus those that can't have children?
Yeah. I'm not dealing with the topic yet. I have not decided whether I want to put a topic like that in this book or not. You're having me lean towards including such a chapter. It will be called On Having or Not Having Children. Yeah, that could be a chapter in itself.
Because it's
And
the couple,
those are two very different scenarios, of course, too.
and
Yeah,
then you have the couple that decide since they can't have children, they're going to adopt children.
Yes.
Sure.
Then there's the couple that struggles for 2 or 3 years with infertility. That's a particular challenge and misery in and of itself. That's one of the subsections of the chapter I could write.
And then there's the couple who don't want children, and they've been very kind of like adamant about
Yeah.
that, but a child just happens to come along.
Oh, in an era when it gets harder and harder to have an abortion. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Mm-mm-mm-mm. Thank you. All right. Should that be my next chapter? Maybe that should be my next chapter. To
Could be a
have or
whole
have.
book.
To have or
Yeah.
to have or have not.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, yeah.
You know what? I think there can be a chapter and should be a chapter, so I'll put it in this book. It's not just for people who are in the process of getting married. It's anybody who is in the process of getting married, building a marriage, or who's suffering because their marriage is suffering.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
certainly with people with fertility problems and people who have unwanted children, people, special needs children. That's a good part of the chapter too. Holy God.
Yeah, it probably can't be understated the effect of kids entering into a marriage, you know,
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It is totally
in any
disruptive.
fashion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Any other comments? Observations? You got tired from the history of the human race? God, have things changed? I have utmost respect for the brain power of human beings. We have absolutely been marvelous learners and increasingly adept understanders, not only of our own plight, but of everything on the planet and of how the whole universe works. We are quite godlike. We started out walking out of the ocean on some legs that somehow grew, and we have become quite godlike.
At least in our own
With-
opinion. We invented math and wow, it explains everything.
Now, Ernst Becker in his book, The Denial of Death, says, I remember one of his sentences, a human being is a God who shits.
Mhm.
And what he intended by that is that our intelligence, our ranging imagination, we can visit the beginnings of the universe, we can visit what's like in alternative worlds, we can see what the future of power is like, how to master the atom. Our range of conceptualization and imagining and actually accomplishing is very godlike. We have better powers now than the ancients imagined their own gods had. We don't have some things they imagined, but we have many things much more powerful than they imagined for their gods. So in that sense, we are godlike, but we are stuck. Our consciousness is trapped in a body, and our body is future. That's what he meant by shit. Our body is going to get old, get frail, and die. And our body, we are not immortal at this point. We are trapped in this future thing that's going to fall apart and inflict death on us. So that's why he called us a god who shits. Any of the gods who were on Mount Olympus were immortal. They were not done in by their bodies. If their bodies were wounded, they magically healed again immediately.
Mhm.
But I find us quite godlike. Oh, as a matter of fact, I think we're better God than the God of the Old Testament is. We're
Well,
not
that's not a
doing
high
very
bar.
well yet. That's right. Not a high bar. I think we're less petty, less jealous, less demanding of obsequiousness
Mhm.
than the God of the Old Testament.
Hmm.
We have surpassed that God.
Well, some of us.
Some of us, in some places.
Yeah.
Okay, I will say goodbye to you now, and maybe the next chapter will be children, or maybe one of my other planned next chapters will fit in better as a sequel. And at some point, oh, I may even remember some things I forgot that are on the list of things that everybody needs to figure out how to do.
Okay.
That consciousness may come to me. Oh, and if any of you think of things that weren't on my list, please tell me.
It could be an encyclopedia.
Part 2.
Yeah.
All right, have a good weekend,
Okay,
guys.
you too.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.